Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. This panel is brought to you by the Global Travel and Tourism Resilience Council, part of the wonderful Jacobs Media Group, a global voice for travel and hospitality industries. The Resilience Council is an incubator that facilitates partnerships and collaborations between the public and private sectors. And the Council has partnered with ATM this week to share thought leadership and insight on critical issues that the industry is facing today. And among them is greenwashing. Now, if you haven't heard the term greenwashing before, you certainly will be hearing a lot more of it. And the definition is the act of providing the public or investors with misleading or outright false information about the environmental impact of a company's products and operations. And that's what we'll be discussing today. I'm your host, Sarah Headley-Hymers, Editorial Director of Connecting Travel, the Middle East's leading B2B travel trade publication, also published by Jacobs Media Group in both English and Arabic. And before we tackle the subject, I want to introduce you to our panelists. The jobs that they have didn't really exist 10 years ago, so I think it's quite important to introduce and explain who each person is, and I'll be joining them now. So Catherine, if we could start with you. Catherine Logan from GBTA.
Yes, hello everybody. As Sarah says, my name is Catherine Logan. I am GBTA's regional lead for EMEA and APAC, and what GBTA stands for, it's the Global Business Travel Association. We are the world's leading business travel association, and we support the industry through the provision of community, as in the network, learning through training courses and events like this, and also advocacy where we lobby on key issues affecting the industry.
And Lucas Bobas from Amadeus.
So my name is Lucas Bobes. I'm Group Environmental Officer and Head of ESG Reporting at Amadeus. Amadeus is a technology provider for the travel industry. And as such, for us, it's very important. A very important part of my role is to define the sustainability strategy of the company. And this has evolved significantly in the last few years, especially, I would say, after the pandemic. And also, and very importantly, one of the most important things that we would like to talk about today is that we need to build partnerships. If we acknowledge that sustainability is a global topic that deserves cooperation and not working in isolation. So that's myself.
Thank you, Lucas. Now, Dirk.
I'm Dirk Singer. I'm the head of sustainability at Simplifying. We are an airline strategy consulting firm. We've worked for about 100 airlines and airports for the past 15 years. Sarah said that these jobs didn't exist 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was in the PR and advertising industry. I set up 2 PR agencies in London, and I became interested in the sustainability space really about 2019. So just before COVID, when the whole flight shaming thing was a thing in Europe. And if you remember, something was very much pushed by Greta Thunberg to try and make flying become socially unacceptable because of the environmental consequences. So as part of that, I very much track climate groups, environmentalists, and I look at sustainability from a perception and communications point of view, which means that I also look at greenwashing quite a lot as well.
Thank you very much. Inga Hubrecht from Radisson. Can you tell us about your role?
Very happy to. Hello everyone, I'm Inge Herbrechts with Radisson Hotel Group, and my role did exist 14 years ago because I joined 14 years ago. So we're one of the largest hotel companies in the world. We have 1,100 hotels in 90 countries, and I'm the global head of sustainability and safety and security. So now in sustainability, I'm working on 2 key things. One is to help make our company net zero by 2050. If we calculate that back, we have targets based in science. And so that means we need to halve our emissions by 2030. So we're working very hard on our buildings, on renewable energy and our operations to make it happen. And the second thing is, and that's why it's so important to be here at ATM today, is to stimulate responsible tourism and responsible travel. And we do that by giving clarity and trust to the guests about what it means to be a sustainable hotel.
It's a big job.
Yeah.
Big job. So I want to start by talking about examples of greenwashing so we can actually pinpoint what this is. Catherine, if I can come to you first, if you could give me some examples of common greenwashing practices that you see within companies.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is, our focus is primarily around the emissions that relate to business travel. And, that is a really, really complex and difficult thing to try and establish. So, for instance, with a flight, you could have 8 different figures that would be that could be given as how much the environmental impact of a single flight, and a 50% variance in the value. So this is a really complex picture, and it makes it very difficult for individuals and corporations to actually pinpoint the actual numbers. So I think one thing I would say is this is challenging. But if we were to look at examples of greenwashing, one could be, for instance, an airline. Their biggest environmental impact would be around the emissions of a flight. But if they're focusing on things like food waste, that's not really the area that's going to move the needle. The second thing is around treating sustainability efforts as a creative PR exercise, as opposed to affecting a fundamental change in operations. And then the third thing would be very much around promoting things that are already required from a legal perspective. So, for instance, in the UK, all publicly listed companies need to provide a clear deliverable plan as to how they're going to get to net zero. That is not like a flag-waving green exercise. That's something that legally people are required to do. And then I think probably the worst thing is where you maybe have an organization that is promoting its green credentials while at the same time lobbying against environmental or sustainable legislation.
Thank you. That's a good summary of it.
Mm-hmm.
Lucas, do you agree with those examples?
Yeah, certainly. I would like to maybe give it a little different perspective, in the sense that about greenwashing, the thing is that, unfortunately, in order to identify what is greenwashing, we need to have a clear idea about what is green and what is not green. And that's unfortunately not very easy to do, no? I mean, you mentioned, for example, the difficulty in estimating carbon emissions per passenger. And the reason for that is that there is no exact calculation for that, especially when you are trying to make the calculation maybe 4 months in advance of the flight. By that time, you don't even know what aircraft is going to fly, how many people are going to be on the plane, and what's the weather going to be like, no? Which are principal elements. So at some point, it is very important that we identify that the topic needs to be addressed in cooperation. As I was saying at the beginning, there is not so much point in claiming that I am much greener than my competitors, because that doesn't solve any problem. And if we are serious about sustainability, first thing is to say, well, we have to acknowledge it's a global issue. If we don't change the current course, we all are going to be in trouble as business, even if it is that for that selfish objective. I think we have to realize, and we have to act together. No? I think the industry, fortunately, is transitioning from a situation in which the greenwashing claims were rejected to a situation where we are trying to identify what can we do about it to diminish the impact in the industry. And I think we have to continue that transition in order to work together between corporations and also in public-private cooperation.
Yeah. And Dirk, some countries are now legislating against greenwashing. Can you give us some examples of the behaviors that have resulted in companies being reprimanded for greenwashing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give 3 examples. I mean, actually, the first one doesn't involve a court case, but I want to pick up something that Catherine said about companies that focus on little things like, let's say food waste rather than emissions. And there was an example last week where a major European airline, where they put out a tweet showing a cabin crew member standing in front of a sort of an aisle, and it was about recycling coffee grounds. And the message was these coffee grounds were somehow going to be turned to compost and green energy and et cetera, et cetera. And that came in for a lot of criticism. which is a shame because the airline in question is actually doing quite a lot underneath the surface, in terms of sustainable aviation fuel. But I guess the problem is making it look as if it's the only thing that you're doing and not providing any sort of context. So, for example, they said that they turned coffee grounds into green energy. There's lots of questions. Where, when, how? Is that going to be used for SAF? Is that going to be used for electricity? What are they actually doing? But to give two other examples that in Europe that were struck down by ad regulators. One is a low-cost airline that called its carbon offsetting program green flying. And the Dutch ad regulator said that, said obviously that you can't claim that carbon offsetting is green flying as such. The second one involved a Central European airline that last year for the Venice Biennale, so the big film festival, was offering tickets where passengers could offset their flights using sustainable aviation fuel. And their message was fly CO2 neutral to Venice. Now the ad regulator again struck that down and said, well, that's two reasons. Number one is obviously sustainable aviation fuel offers an 80% life cycle emission, so it's not strictly speaking fly CO2 neutral. And the second point they made was that the airline was using terms not familiar to the consumer. So obviously if you go out onto the street and you ask people, what is sustainable aviation fuel? Most people probably wouldn't be able to give you a sort of a coherent answer of what it was. So those were two reasons why the airline in question had its ad struck down as a result of that.
And can you give us an example, conversely, of a company who's running a campaign at the moment that is successful, that works for connecting with the consumer and corporates?
Yeah, I can give a few examples. EasyJet, the low-cost carrier in in Europe, has a very robust net zero strategy. And I know one of the things we're going to talk about is standards, but it's audited by SBTi, which is Standards Initiative, and that's and it's measured. It's very detailed about what it's going to do. They talk about investment in hydrogen aircraft. They have deals with Rolls-Royce where they're going to develop the technology. And in the US, I know one thing that we're going to talk about later is United Airlines is another example of a airline that uses storytelling to sort of articulate its sustainability program.
And this is with the Sesame Street.
It is.
Character.
So what they're doing is United Airlines has invested in a company called Fulcrum Bioenergy, which is an American bioenergy company. And Fulcrum Bioenergy has a plant in Nevada in the US, which is turning household waste, so trash, into SAF. So it's trash to SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. And to illustrate that, what United did is they signed a deal with Sesame Street, and they're using Oscar the Grouch, so the green monster character who lives in a trash can, to bring that to life. And it's a series of videos where Oscar talks to United Airlines staff about how his banana peel or what have you can be used to fuel flights in future. Now the thing about the Oscar campaign is if you go to the United website, it makes no claims about green flying or guilt-free flying or sustainable flying, and it's very, very clear that that at the moment SAF is a very small percentage of their overall fuel consumption. It's 0.1%. So they use a well-known character to tell a story, something people probably didn't even realize about you can turn household waste into jet fuel. They do it in a very engaging way, and they don't make over-the-top claims that can be easily shot down. And that's a very good example of an airline just doing something well and using storytelling to bring something to life that that most consumers probably won't be aware of, without over egging their claims at the same time.
Yeah, so the message is clear. You don't want to overpromise to the consumer or to the investor. You want to give them a proposition that's a story that they can engage with.
Absolutely, and it's based on fact. United genuinely is investing in a company which is turning household waste into fuel. They actually do have a plant in Nevada which is doing that. Now, obviously, the quantities of this right now are quite small, and United makes that clear. But that's expanding as well. So, for example, Jet2, a UK charter airline, recently signed a deal again with Fulcrum to invest in a similar plant, which will be in the UK, which will turn household garbage and trash into fuel.
Yeah, and as you were saying as well, Catherine, don't brag about doing the basics.
Yeah, absolutely.
so that's a kind of good summary of greenwashing and where we're at and how to avoid doing it. But now I'd like to talk to all of you about how do we prevent greenwashing from happening within our industry. So Inga, if I can talk to you about that. We talked previously about the sheer number of frameworks creating confusion.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is essential, of course, is that the speed and the size of the things we need to do to decarbonize are very technical. It's a very technical path to have science-based targets, to work on green buildings, and guests don't necessarily, if I'm talking about hotels, they don't necessarily want to know about how you regulate your air conditioning, how your building is insulated, all these technical things. So we need to find ways to build that trust with the clients and to translate these very technical things into easily recognizable stamps or standards. And that's actually a good thing. But the thing which is a bit confusing for the guests is that there's too many of those standards out there. So still in the surveys that are done by the likes of Expedia and Booking every single year, clients are saying, about 70% of travelers are saying, we want to take sustainable travel choices, but at the same time, almost the same number says, we don't know how to. And I think that has to do with the myriad of frameworks out there. What is a good claim? What isn't a good claim? And that's what we are talking about today. So in any case, a good claim is one that is verified and certified. So those are the ones we need to be looking out for. And I think it's also very important that the various industry groups like GBTA, like the hotel associations, that we are working together to say, let's try to streamline and let's try to say to the market what are the good, credible, verified and certified eco-labels or essential standards, for example, for hotels or for airlines and for complete travel.
So going to GBTA and back to you, Catherine, you've got 5 very clear guidelines for how we can prevent greenwashing moving forward. Can you give us those 5 factors?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I think I think what the panel is saying is that we need to have a very clear, consistent way in which we measure a company or an organization's environmental impact. And I think increasing scrutiny from watchdogs and from the public, it means that by greenwashing, there is a real genuine reputational threat by that. And that's actually leading to a phenomenon that I just learned about, which is green hushing. And I think, Dirk, that goes to your point where it's almost like organizations now are afraid to make green claims because they know that they will be scrutinized to the nth degree. I think that there needs to be a lot more regulation around mandatory reporting. So that, and what we're seeing that is so that all industries or all organizations are reporting to the same standard. And we're seeing that with the CSRD in the EU and also with the SEC in the US, where it's sustainable or environmental reporting is now sitting within the finance or the audit function within an organization, and I think that's going to make a difference. In the EU, there's also regulation around green claims. So it's making sure that if an organization is making green claims, that these are valid and can be backed up. So that is now, say EU are really, really scrutinizing this. And as I mentioned before, the corporations, say in the UK, are now having to deliver a clear and deliverable plan as to how they're going to get to net zero. So that ESG reporting is becoming a lot more rigorous and is becoming a legal requirement. And the more that happens, the more that there will actually be tangible changes within organizations' operations, which removes the need for greenwashing because there's actually real things that are happening. And finally, it's around better awareness and education of the consumers so that they know that they're a better and more sophisticated judge of what organizations are doing.
And awareness was something that you mentioned, Dirk, when we discussed it. Awareness and raising awareness of the consumer. Is that right?
If I may, I
Yes.
didn't mention that, but I wanted to follow on what you are saying, because I think it's very important. I mean, all these new frameworks and regulations, especially CSRD, is focusing, I think, on the basic principles that I think we have to follow to avoid greenwashing. And that's, I think, 3 steps. The first one is to carry out a materiality analysis, as they call it, which is basically to analyze, okay, how can I impact sustainability, and at what different levels can I act on it so that I can positively influence or at least reduce my negative impacts. No? The second point is to establish a clear plan to engage into the different areas in which you can influence. And this is very important because some areas may seem quite irrelevant in the context of others. For example, in our case, okay, we have an office, we have a plan to commute to the office for our employees, and we have to frame that initiative into the right context, as Dirk was saying. All the initiative has to frame and be communicated in the right context because they are important from the qualitative point of view in this case. From the quantitative point of view, we may have other things that are more relevant, for example, to influence travelers so that they choose more sustainable options, and this has a multiplying effect. So communication is key, not maybe to go into the greenwashing, but at least to communicate each of the initiatives in the right context and to the right audience. Because if I say that I'm contributing to the sustainability of the industry simply because I am encouraging our employees and our workforce to carpool, then I'm completely missing the point. On the other hand, if we are working collaboratively to promote the use of sustainable aviation fuel, that's a completely different area. No? So I think materiality analysis act on the materiality analysis by implementing specific plans and communicate them properly without greenwashing and without doing greenwashing, but putting everything at the right level. I think it's important to educate the traveler, to educate the audience, the general public, and also to be as honest as possible into achieving the solution that you are intending to.
And so what I'm hearing is that sustainability frameworks are the answer ultimately to putting an end to greenwashing. So can we talk a little bit about the different sustainability frameworks that you guys are familiar with, that you've adopted in your own businesses? So Inga, if you can tell us about the WTTC basics package that you're partnering with, and how it works and why you chose that, why that was the one that you decided to trust.
I would say we were actually coming together with a group of destinations, industry organizations, the WTTC, but also peers, other big hotel companies, to say we need a trusted entry-level stamp or logo standard for essential hotel sustainability. And we need it for 2 reasons. We need it because the guests, when they travel, they need to be able to see when they book what is a hotel that is really doing the essentials and where it is verified that they are doing these essentials. And as hotel companies and destinations, we came together because we know that in our global portfolios, not everyone is as advanced. Not every hotel understands what it means to become net zero. We have a couple of leading hotels here in Dubai with Radisson, but not every hotel understands that. So we need to help hotels and also the many independent hotels that are out there to get started on essential sustainability. And that's why we came together, and we actually together, the practitioners, the destinations, we defined these first 12 criteria that are in the essential areas of efficiency, planet and people, to make sure that hotels do these essential steps, and that you as travelers, when you book those hotels, you see that label, you know that it is verified, because it will be verified, it is verified by a third party. So it's the first step on a sustainability journey with essential actions: carbon reduction, energy reduction, water reduction, waste measurements, no plastic in the hotel, these kind of things in very specific steps that then later will lead on to a full eco label. So it's fully aligned with GSTC. the full eco-label, quality eco-labels that are out there. And then as a next step, it will lead to be net zero hotels, and then who knows, one day net positive hotels. But it's very important to get started somewhere, and it's also important that this is a standard which was defined by the industry, for the industry, and it's based on verified actions.
And this is a consumer-facing
Exactly.
stamp system.
Yeah.
And of the 12 criteria, hotels have to achieve 8 of the 12 within the first year.
It's actually, it has continuous improvement built in.
Yeah.
Because they can start with 8, and then they need to prove they improve over the next years. So within 3 years, they need to go from 8 to 12, and then they need to move on.
Yeah.
So they will need to move on to a full eco label with 100 criteria. They will need to move on to other steps in their net zero journey, etc. So it's really to get everyone started and move them along on this sustainability journey. But it's very important that for the travelers, it's a verified system. So you know, when you see that label, you know that it's actually proven by a verification.
And what does the label look like?
It looks actually a little bit like a heart. One is a destination blob, like you see on a map, and the other is a part of a leaf. So it looks like a heart made up of a destination and a leaf.
And can you tell us who else is in the partnership adopting this framework?
Yeah, we actually have hotel companies from around the world, like, for example, Accor, minor hotels from Thailand, a couple of hotel groups from Spain, like NH, Melia, Barcelo. I'm forgetting some for sure. We have Chinese hotel groups, the number 1 and the number 2, Jinjiang and Huazhu hotels. We have groups like the Hotel Association of India, the Taj Hotel Group. I'm sorry, I'm certainly forgetting some destinations like Madagascar, Mauritius, Mediterranean destinations, Caribbean destinations, Colombia, Mexico.
Wow.
So it's really, what we try to do is make this movement to say, this is the essentials, start with that, and then tell the consumer that these hotels are starting with that, and involve everyone.
Yeah.
Because I think it's, we have a sustainability team in Radisson Hotel Group. We have a team focusing on the technicalities of net zero, of all these things, of integrating renewable energy. But there's other players that may not have that. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, let's give a system to the industry that everybody can get started on, but at the same time is a trusted platform for travelers to book sustainable travel.
And that's for hospitality. Dirk, in aviation, which framework are companies turning to register their emissions?
So before I come to that, I just want to sort of pick up on a few points that the rest of the panelists made. And the key word for me that's coming out is trust. And I think that if we take a step back, these greenwashing claims, the reason why we're sitting on stage here today, it hasn't come out of thin air. And they're happening for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a good way for the groups who are pursuing these claims to get media coverage. There's been endless accounts in the media about, company X, Y, and Z, having their ads struck down or being ruled against for greenwashing claims. But number two, and speaking particularly about aviation, is they just don't believe us. There's been a history of claims that have been made that have turned out to be nothing. So for example, last year there was an environmental charity in Europe called Possible, which did some research, and they claimed that between 2010 and 2020, that 49 out of 50 airline sustainability targets had either been missed or had been delayed or had been watered down. And that's why it's so important to have this, this element of third-party measurement that's there. Now, in the airline space and the aviation space, one of the bodies that's getting traction is SBTI, which is the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and that's it's made out of the UN Global Compact, the WWF, a few other organizations, and what you do there is you submit your net zero plan and targets to be audited by a third-party panel, and you have to have a near-term goal, which I believe is 35% reductions by 2030, and obviously a net zero 2050 goal, and it's quite rigorous. For example, one of the stipulations is that you can't have more than 10% of your net zero target made up of carbon offsetting. So it really has to be made up of either of new technologies, so hydrogen aircraft like EasyJet is doing, or electric aircraft, or sustainable aviation fuel. And there's about 24 airlines right now that are sort of that are going through that process. I think actually Amadeus is an SBTi. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think SBTi has become very quickly the major framework when it comes to formal recognized commitments towards decarbonization. And it handles one of the most difficult things, in my opinion, which is the indirect emissions, Scope 3, and also to some extent the Scope 4, as they call it, the avoided emissions that you generate as well. So that is why we thought, okay, it is a common language, because one of the things that SBTi achieves, in my view, is that something that Inge referred to before. Some of the topics we are trying to achieve are very technically complex. And if you want them to be understood by the general public in a matter of minutes, it has to be summarized one way or the other. And that way is saying SBTi compliant, no? Which, okay, if we all go to the same framework, then we are going in the same direction, so yeah.
But the SBTi is aviation specific, and
No, it isn't. It
Yeah,
isn't.
it's actually it's for any institution even that intends to set a plan for decarbonization in the long run, basically.
So for
They
example,
have industry-specific targets. So they have a particular program for aviation. But if you're in other industries, they will have targets that are measured towards
within
that.
those industries. So Lucas, then, you're also involved with another framework backed by Prince Harry, no less, Travelist. Can you tell us about that framework and who it's for and how it's different to the existing frameworks at STBI and at WTTC Basics?
Okay. Well, going a little bit back in the context, since 2008, we were starting to debate in Amadeus how to include sustainability information in our distribution platforms. Basically, in our distribution business, what we do, you can simplify to say, I provide information about schedules, availability, and fares of travel options. And we realized that we were already starting to get demand from customers saying, you need to include sustainability piece of information so that this is also factored in when a traveler makes a choice. Namely, carbon emissions estimation per passenger. Okay, so we were starting to look for that source of information. And it turned out that depending on who you ask, the estimated carbon emissions per passenger can vary significantly, and for very good reasons that can be summarized in three. One is data availability, because you need to know what aircraft is going to fly, how many passengers are going to be in the plane, and many other technical details about the calculation of emissions. And this may vary even within the same flight. The second is some scientific uncertainties that there are about the specific effects of aviation at altitude. And the third thing that is, in the end, you need to allocate emissions of the aircraft to the passengers. And that depends on how many, of course, passengers are in the aircraft, which is something that you don't know, especially if you're making the booking a few months in advance. So we looked for different calculators, and we found that there were many existing in the industry. All of them have criteria that could be defended, and all of them could be criticized, and all of them claimed that their solution was the best. And what Travelist, in our opinion, is bringing is a different approach, which is to say, okay, we need to we have achieved a certain level of precision in the calculation. It can be improved, but the point is that we have some information that can be useful for travelers, but we need to reach consensus about how to display this information, because if a travel agency that is using Amadeus on the background says that your flight emits 100 kilograms, and then you have to change that flight, and you realize that for the same flight you get an estimation that's 300 kilos, and I'm talking about real examples, then you, as a traveler, mistrust the information logically that you're getting, and then this is fundamentally what we are trying to achieve, to contribute to the consensus. And that is very much the objective of Travelist in many respects, both in the aviation sector and the accommodation. So we joined the coalition back in July last year, and we hope to contribute towards a uniform framework to use by everyone.
Can you tell us, as I asked Inga, how do you identify if an airline or a hotel is Travelist approved, and who is in the coalition with you? Which entities?
Well, at the moment there are 9 entities, including, I hope I can mention all of them. If I remember, Booking.com, Google, Expedia, Trip.com, Skyscanner. What else am I missing? Travelport, by the way, this is very important. We are working with our competitors in a non-competitive way to achieve the same aspect, and ourselves. And I don't know if I missed anyone. The point is not so well. The idea is to say, okay, I want to offer the traveler what are the most sustainable options there are in the different options that are presented to them, no? So that they can make a more informed choice. So it's not, and it's, in principle, it's also debatable how are we going to display this information so that it looks the same at the same time. So it's not that it's only that we need to calculate the impact, but also, okay, how to inform. Are you going to say that this flight is a certain percentage below average, or are you going to say the exact emissions, which may be not so informative because that doesn't say much, or are you going to do it in a different way? So this is the things that we are discussing.
And may I add something? I just want to add to Lucas's point that platforms like the ones that have worked on hotel sustainability basics and WTTC are talking to travelers. So it's important for the travelers that these initiatives speak to each other, because we have an ecosystem, of course, hotel rooms being booked on our direct website, but also on many of the Travelist members' websites. So it's very important that we keep that information streamlined and that we agree on how to present that to the traveler. That, for example, when a hotel meets the hotel sustainability basics or has an eco label, that is also shown and mapped to the criteria that Travelist has. So we are in conversations to make that as seamless and as transparent as possible.
And streamlining is incredibly important. Catherine, if I can come to you on that point, and any other things that the frameworks that exist separately, how they can coexist and collaborate to make it a greener world.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I absolutely agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said. You know, cross-industry collaboration is absolutely key. Consistency is key. This is a really difficult area, and it's quite a new area, and so it definitely, for the sake of all of us, it should not be an area of competition. And so this whole cross-industry alignment is a really key pillar of what we do at GBTA. You know, be it from an emissions or tracking perspective, we have signed an MOU with Travelist, and we're lobbying hard on Count Emissions EU. From an accreditation perspective, we're working with GSTC, and they're assessing different accreditations to make sure that they're robust and appropriate. So whenever you see a green label, you know that it actually means something. And then the area that GBTA is particularly involved in, given the nature of our membership, is around procurement. So we are, with our airline RFP, we have already incorporated a number of sustainability questions. So that means that element can be streamlined in terms of airline procurement. We're doing the same for the accommodations. Our accommodations RFP is an industry standard. And so we're incorporating sustainability questions into that. And then in August, we're launching a sustainability matrix, which will identify essential and desirable criteria around the area of sustainability. And I think the more that we have refined and pinpointed the key things that need to be measured, that need to be, that are indications of success and need to be asked for, the more consistent our approach will be right across the piece, and therefore reducing that opportunity for greenwashing.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now, Dirk, to close our session today, you have a phrase that I think is very useful for anybody who works in environmental departments within their own companies. What's your closing line on how we should proceed?
Tell the story and don't mark your own homework. So tell the story of what you're actually doing. And let's say what the process is. So I mentioned trash to SAF, or turning used cooking oil into SAF, or whatever it is. Or maybe you can tell the story about the people who are behind it without making broad claims about sustainable travel or green flying, what have you, that can and will be struck down. And then secondly, don't mark your own homework. So for my fellow panelists, some of the examples they've been giving, have a credible third party on board who measures your sustainability journey and who backs up some of the claims that you're actually making.
Thank you very much. And can I have a round of applause for our panelists today, Catherine, Lucas, Dirk, and Inga. Thank you so much for your time.